Some of you who've watched me do this a bunch of times will note that I'm aiming for a very, very thin layer of ink. And that's because today we're going to talk about pictures in newspapers. Initially, any images in a paper were from woodcuts, and we've discussed that, and you've seen a lot of collection that we have. But in the mid-1880s, a photographic process was developed that allowed the newspapers to print actual photographs. So there's a lot more information in a photograph than there is in a woodcut or something. The process is referred to as a halftone. In printing with letterpress, you either put some ink on the paper or you don't put anything on the paper. You can't say, I want a gray. You can't get in those midtones. Well, they figured the process by converting a photographic image into a series of dots, and by different processes, they exercised some control over it. So they were able to get and kind of trick the eye into thinking they're actually looking at a photograph, which has a graduated scale from white to black. When they shoot the image, of course, you ended up with a negative, not like nowadays, it's just some electronic thing you put in your pocket, but we actually had negatives of the images, and by exposing them through a screen which had a certain dot per inch count, and for newspapers, it was generally around the 60 to 80 dot per inch. That gave them the best pictures while printing it on pretty cheap paper. Newsprint is cheap paper. So what they would do was expose through this dot screen onto a photosensitive coating that's on a metallic plate, where a lot of light shines through, which would actually be the dark shadow. It produced a very large dot, where the light coming through was very minimal, which would be the bright spots. It produced a very, very tiny dot. And so when you print halftone, you're looking at dots against the background of the paper. So if the dot is really tiny, it appears that that's a very light area. Where the dot is very large, that's a dark area. In fact, on some of them, the dots get so big that they actually bump into each other. Now I have a halftone plate here. Jared's going to try and really get in close on this so you can see that this is actually comprised of lots and lots of dots, really tiny dots and fairly large dots. When you're printing a halftone print, the ink balance is fairly critical. That's why I was rolling out a fairly thin layer. If I over ink this, it just becomes one black rectangle. So we'll see how good a job I can do on this today. Just pick up one more sprayer full of ink. I believe this cut that I'm working on here, this halftone print, was a book image talking about Gold Rush. And that's how they got full tonal range images in the newspaper. Of course, nowadays they print by the offset method, and that allows for full color.